The kingdom of Zambari was a land of breathtaking beauty, known for its vast golden fields, towering palm trees, and rivers that sparkled like diamonds under the sun. Merchants traveled from distant lands to trade their finest silk, rare spices, and precious gems in the grand marketplace that stood at the heart of the kingdom. The air was filled with the sounds of music, laughter, and the clinking of gold coins as traders struck deals. Zambari's people took great pride in their traditions, believing that wealth and status determined one's fate. Yet, beneath this world of splendor, fate had its own plans, ones that did not bend to the will of gold or power. Princess Zala, the beloved daughter of King Malu and Queen Yelena, was unlike any royal before her. While others in the palace adorned themselves with the finest garments and reveled in luxurious banquets, Zala found joy in simpler things. She had a heart as vast as the kingdom itself, one that valued kindness above riches. Though she had been raised in a world of privilege, she often disguised herself in plain robes to wander through the bustling marketplace, where she spoke with the common folk and listened to their stories. She longed to understand the struggles of the people beyond the palace walls, believing that a ruler should serve her people with compassion rather than demand their obedience through fear. One day, during one of her secret visits, she noticed a man sitting near the steps of the temple. His clothes were tattered, his face worn with hardship, but his eyes held a quiet strength that set him apart from the other beggars. His name was Django. He was a man with no home, no wealth, and no family, shunned by society as if he were invisible. While most walked past him with indifference, Zala was drawn to him. There was something noble about the way he held himself, despite the misery that surrounded him. He did not beg for pity or curse his fate. Instead, he sang songs that carried wisdom, his voice steady like the flowing rivers of Zambari. In a kingdom where riches dictated one's worth, Django had nothing to offer, except his heart, his resilience, and a destiny that neither of them could yet foresee. The winds of fate stirred as Zala and Django's paths intertwined, setting in motion a tale that would defy all expectations. Dressed in a simple linen robe, her face partially hidden beneath the hood of her cloak, Princess Zala weaved through the lively streets of Zambari's grand marketplace. The scent of roasted plantains and spiced tea filled the air as merchants called out their finest wares. She had always been fascinated by the marketplace, by the laughter of children playing near the well, by the old women sharing gossip as they bargained for fabric, by the blacksmiths hammering steel into fine weapons. It was a world so different from the polished halls of the palace, a world full of life, struggle, and resilience. As she made her way past the temple steps, her eyes fell upon the same beggar she had seen before, Django. He sat on a worn-out mat, his hands resting on his lap, his gaze fixed on the passing crowd. Unlike the other beggars, he did not plead for food or coins. Instead, he sang softly, his deep voice carrying an old folk tale, one that spoke of love, loss, and destiny. People walked past him without stopping, but Zala could not. She found herself drawn to him, intrigued by the way he carried himself with quiet dignity. "You sing of love and fate," Zala said, stepping closer. "Yet, the world has not been kind to you. Do you still believe in such things?" Django looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "Fate is not determined by riches, nor is love measured in gold," he replied. "Even the mightiest of kings are powerless before destiny's will." Zala felt a spark of curiosity. She sat beside him, something no princess would ever dare to do. They talked for hours about the stars that guided travelers, about the old legends of Zambari, about dreams that could not be bought. Django told her that he once had a family, a life beyond the streets, but fate had taken it all away. Still, he did not curse his misfortune. He embraced it, believing that everything happened for a reason. Days turned into weeks, and Zala found herself returning to the marketplace just to see him. She would bring him warm bread and fresh fruit, not as charity but as a gift between friends. They laughed, shared stories, and slowly, unknowingly, she found herself falling in love. She knew it was impossible. She was a princess, destined to marry a prince or a nobleman. Yet, in Django she saw something no riches could offer: kindness, wisdom, and a heart untouched by greed. Society would never accept their love, but Zala was beginning to realize that love was not meant to be dictated by rules. The grand hall of the palace was adorned with golden chandeliers and silk drapes, but the air was thick with tension. King Malu sat on his high throne, his face hard as stone. His advisors stood by his side, whispering among themselves, while Queen Yelena watched with quiet concern. Princess Zala knelt before her father, her heart steady despite the storm that loomed over her. She knew this day would come, the day she would have to defy the kingdom's expectations. "Zala," the king began, his deep voice echoing through the hall. "You are a princess of Zambari. It is time you fulfill your duty and accept the hand of a nobleman." She had heard this many times before, but today was different. Today she would not stay silent. She lifted her head, her eyes firm. "Father, I cannot marry for wealth or power. I wish to marry for love." A murmur spread through the court. The noblemen exchanged glances, some in disbelief, others in anger. A princess choosing love over status? It was unheard of. The king's jaw tightened. "Love?" he scoffed. "A princess does not have the luxury of love. You will marry Prince Omari of the Eastern Kingdom. The alliance will strengthen our trade routes and secure our future." Zala clenched her fists. "But what of my future? My happiness? I cannot marry a man I do not love." The king slammed his fist against the armrest. "Enough," he bellowed. "You have been given everything, wealth, comfort, honor. And yet you throw it all away for a beggar?" A gasp rippled through the court. Queen Yelena stepped forward, her expression pleading. "Zala, my child," she said gently, "I understand your heart, but you must think of your people. A queen must put duty above personal desires." Zala turned to her mother, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. "And what kind of queen would I be if I could not even follow my own heart?" The king rose from his throne, his anger barely contained. "If you refuse to marry as I command, you will no longer be my daughter. You will have no claim to the throne, no home in this palace." The words struck deep, but Zala did not waver. She took a deep breath, then bowed low before her father. "Then I shall leave," she said softly. Gasps filled the room. Even the queen looked stunned. "Zala?" her mother whispered, tears in her eyes. But Zala had made her choice. She stood, her back straight, her heart unshaken. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the palace, leaving behind the life she had always known. The guards did not stop her. The nobles watched in stunned silence. The king sat back down, his fury giving way to disbelief. His daughter, his only child, had chosen a beggar over a kingdom. Outside the palace gates, Django stood waiting. He did not ask questions, nor did he doubt her decision. He simply took her hand and together they walked away, leaving behind the riches of the palace for an uncertain but honest future. The once pristine hands of Princess Zala were now rough from labor, her royal silks replaced by a simple cloth dress. The grand halls of the palace were but a distant memory as she sat outside the small hut she now called home, a humble structure made of mud and straw at the edge of the village. Life had changed drastically, but she had no regrets. She had chosen love over luxury, and she would stand by that choice, no matter the hardships that came her way. Django worked tirelessly to provide for them, taking up small tasks in the village, chopping wood, carrying water, and helping farmers in exchange for food. But work was scarce, and some villagers still looked at him with disdain, believing him unworthy of the former princess. Many refused to offer help, thinking Zala had made a foolish decision by leaving the palace. There were nights when they had nothing but a few scraps to eat. Zala would ignore her hunger, choosing instead to lay beside Django and listen to his stories. His voice was soothing, his presence comforting, and despite their suffering, they would fall asleep in each other's arms, content with the love they shared. But love alone could not fill an empty stomach. One day, after another long search for work, Django returned home to find Zala kneeling in the garden, her hands digging into the earth. "What are you doing?" he asked, concerned. She wiped the sweat from her brow and smiled. "If food is scarce, we must learn to grow our own." Django watched as she planted the seeds she had gathered from kind villagers. She refused to sit idly by, waiting for fate to provide. She was no longer a princess locked away in a golden cage. She was a woman learning to survive, side by side with the man she loved. As the days passed, she learned to fetch water from the river, to cook over an open flame, to mend clothes with a needle and thread. The once delicate princess had become a strong, resilient woman. She worked alongside Django, their struggles forging an unbreakable bond between them. Despite the hardships, they found joy in the little things: a warm sunrise, a cool evening breeze, the sound of laughter from nearby children. They had lost everything, yet gained something far more valuable: a love that could endure even the harshest of trials. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and gold as Zala and Django sat outside their small hut, sharing a simple meal of roasted yams. Life had been hard, but they had found peace in each other's presence. That evening, the village square was abuzz with excitement. An old storyteller had arrived, a man known for his wisdom and knowledge of ancient tales. He was a traveler, wandering from kingdom to kingdom, carrying the past within his words. Out of curiosity, Zala and Django made their way to the gathering. The storyteller was an elderly man with a long white beard, his eyes filled with wisdom. He spoke of great battles, of lost empires, of kings and queens whose names had been forgotten by time. But then, as his gaze swept over the crowd, his voice faltered. His eyes locked onto Django, and for a moment he seemed as though he had seen a ghost. "You," the old man whispered, stepping closer. "You are not just a beggar. I know your face. I know your eyes." Django frowned. "Old man, you must be mistaken." The storyteller shook his head. "No, there is no mistake. I have traveled many lands and I have seen the face of your father. You are the lost prince of Zerati." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. Zala's heart pounded as she turned to Django, searching his face for answers. He looked just as confused as she felt. The old man continued, his voice filled with urgency. "Many years ago the kingdom of Zerati was betrayed. Your father, King Jafari, was slain by his own brother, who seized the throne for himself. The palace was set aflame, and all who remained loyal to the king were executed. But before the massacre, the queen, your mother, managed to escape with you. She fled into the night, seeking refuge among commoners. But the journey was dangerous, and she was lost to illness before she could reveal the truth. You were left alone, forced to live in the streets, never knowing who you truly were." Django's breath came in sharp gasps. He shook his head. That cannot be." The old man placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Fate does not make mistakes, my son. You were meant to survive. And now fate has brought you a queen." He turned to Zala. "Princess of Zambari, you were not drawn to him by chance. You were destined to stand beside him, to restore what was stolen." Zala's mind swirled with disbelief and realization. All this time she had believed she had left royalty behind for love. But in truth, love had led her back to something far greater, a purpose. Django, overwhelmed, looked at Zala. "Do you believe this?" he asked, his voice shaking. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "I believe in you. And if this is true, we cannot turn away from it." The old man nodded. "Then the time has come. The lost prince must return. And with him his queen." The decision was made. Django could no longer live as a beggar when he was destined to be a king. Zala, standing firmly by his side, knew that their love had led them to something far greater than themselves. They were no longer just two souls struggling to survive. They were the rightful rulers of a fallen kingdom, and it was time to reclaim what had been stolen. Before dawn, they packed what little they had, Zala's woven shawl, a few pieces of dried fruit, and a small dagger Django had carried for protection. The old storyteller guided them to a hidden path leading out of the village, a route known only to those who traveled in secrecy. Their journey to destiny had begun. The road was treacherous. They traveled through dense forests where shadows moved between the trees, their every step watched by unseen eyes. At night, they slept beneath the stars, taking turns keeping watch for danger. Food was scarce, and there were moments when doubt crept into Django's heart. "Are we chasing a dream, Zala?" he asked one evening as they rested by a dying fire. "I have spent my life as a beggar. What if I am not the ruler they need?" She reached for his hand, her eyes steady. "A true ruler is not measured by gold or power, but by the strength of his heart. And yours is stronger than any king's." Her words gave him strength, and the journey pressed on. As they neared the border of Zerati, they met travelers, warriors, and traders who had heard whispers of the lost prince's return. Many scoffed at the idea, a beggar rising to claim a throne. But others, those who had suffered under the tyrant king, saw something in Django's eyes. An old blacksmith, whose family had been executed by the usurper, offered his sword. A group of rebel fighters hiding in the hills swore their allegiance. A healer, whose village had been burned for refusing to submit, pledged her loyalty. Zala, too, proved herself worthy of the journey. She did not shy away from hardship, walking through mud and climbing steep hills without complaint. She spoke to the people with wisdom, her words igniting hope in their hearts. Slowly their small company grew, turning into a force bound not by greed but by justice. By the time they reached the gates of Zerati, they were no longer just two lost souls. They were leaders, guiding an army that believed in the return of their true king. The time for reckoning had come. The journey had been long, filled with trials and hardships, but as Django and Zala stood before the grand gates of Zerati, they knew the real battle was only beginning. The once great kingdom, which should have been his by birthright, was now a place of fear and oppression under the rule of the usurper, King Baroka. Django's heart pounded as he looked at the towering palace in the distance. The land that once thrived under his father's rule was now lifeless. The people walked with their heads bowed, their backs bent under the weight of suffering. Guards patrolled the streets, ensuring that no one dared speak against the tyrant who had stolen the throne. The rebels who had joined them, former soldiers, blacksmiths, farmers and healers, stood ready. They had suffered under Baroka's rule for years, and tonight, they would reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Django tightened his grip on his sword, a weapon given to him by the blacksmith who had once served his father. "We strike at midnight," Zala whispered, her eyes sharp with determination. She had devised a plan, one that would not rely on brute force alone. "Baroka believes he is untouchable within his walls, but we will make sure he is wrong." Under the cover of darkness they split into groups. Some infiltrated the palace through underground tunnels, passages that had been long forgotten by the current rulers. Others took to the streets, stirring the people into rebellion. Zala led a group to disable the city's warning bells, ensuring that reinforcements wouldn't be summoned in time. Then the battle began. The moment the first gate was breached, chaos erupted. Django, now at the forefront, led his warriors through the palace courtyards, clashing against Baroka's soldiers. Steel met steel, arrows flew through the night sky, and the cries of war filled the air. Though the enemy forces were larger, they lacked the heart and determination that fueled Django's warriors. Zala fought beside him, her quick thinking turning the tides in their favor. She directed the rebels, sending them to take control of key areas. She had studied the palace's weaknesses, knowing exactly where to strike. Her strategies allowed them to advance quickly, overwhelming the enemy forces. As Django reached the throne room, Baroka stood waiting, clad in black armor, his eyes burning with fury. "So the beggar returns," he sneered. "Do you really think you can take this from me?" "This was never yours to take," Django growled, raising his sword. The final battle was fierce. Baroka was strong, but Django fought with the fire of a man reclaiming his destiny. Their swords clashed, each strike sending echoes through the grand hall. The years of suffering, of being cast aside, fueled Django's strength. In the end, Baroka faltered. With a swift strike, Django disarmed him, forcing him to his knees. The palace guards, seeing their ruler defeated, surrendered. The people of Zerati, who had suffered under Baroka's rule for years, erupted into cheers. The battle was won. Justice had prevailed. Django turned to Zala, breathless. "We did it." She smiled, placing a hand on his. "No, my king. You did it." As dawn broke over Zerati, Django took his rightful place on the throne, not as a beggar, not as an outcast, but as the true king. And beside him stood Zala, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. The grand hall of the palace, once filled with darkness and oppression, now shone with golden light. The people of Zerati gathered from far and wide, their eyes brimming with joy and hope. 4 years they had lived under the cruel rule of the usurper, but now their true king had returned. Django stood at the center of it all, dressed in regal robes that once belonged to his ancestors. The crown, a symbol of his rightful place, was placed upon his head by the elder council. The people erupted into cheers, chanting his name as he took the throne that had been stolen from him so long ago. But as he sat upon it, he did not feel like the same man who had once begged for scraps in the streets. He had fought, suffered, and endured, only to emerge stronger, wiser, and ready to lead with justice. Zala stood beside him, resplendent in royal garments, her eyes shining with pride. She had chosen love over luxury, and fate had rewarded her in ways she never imagined. She had not married a beggar, she had married a man of honor, a man who was always meant to be king. And now she was his queen not because of her title, but because she had stood by his side when the world had doubted him. The kingdom of Zerati rejoiced for days. The markets bustled with life, the streets were filled with music and dance, and for the first time in years, laughter echoed through the palace walls. Django declared a feast for all, ensuring that no one would go hungry. The same hands that had once given him scraps now reached out in gratitude, for their king had returned, not as a ruler who sought power, but as a leader who understood the struggles of his people. As the days passed, Django and Zala worked tirelessly to rebuild the kingdom. The people's voices were heard, the laws were rewritten, and justice was restored. The palace gates, once guarded to keep the people out, were now open to all. Django made sure that no one would suffer as he once had, and Zala, with her wisdom and kindness, helped mend the wounds of the past. One evening, as they stood on the palace balcony, looking over their kingdom, Django took Zala's hand. "I once thought I had nothing," he said softly. "But I had everything the moment I met you." Zala smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. And I once thought I had everything, but I only truly found it when I chose love. Their story became legend, told for generations, a tale of love, fate, and destiny's mysterious ways. A beggar became a king, a princess became a queen, and together, they proved that true riches are not found in gold, but in the hearts of those who dare to believe in love. The grand halls of the palace of Zarati echoed with the sounds of celebration. The people rejoiced, feasting and dancing in honor of their new king and queen. Django and Zala had restored justice, bringing hope to a once oppressed land. But in a distant kingdom, another heart was burdened with regret: King Beggar, Zala's father. Seated upon his golden throne, King Beggar listened in stunned silence as his advisors and messengers recounted the astonishing tale. His daughter, whom he had cast aside for choosing love over wealth, had helped reclaim a lost kingdom. The beggar he had scorned was no ordinary man but a prince in disguise, a ruler chosen by fate itself. And in his blindness, he had pushed Zala away, believing her love to be foolish. The weight of his mistake settled heavily upon him. He had been a man who valued strength, power, and legacy, yet his own daughter had built something far greater than he had ever imagined. The people of Zarati flourished under Django and Zala's leadership, their kingdom more prosperous than ever before. King Beggar felt a deep ache in his chest. His pride had cost him his daughter's trust, and now he feared it was too late to mend what had been broken. 4 days he wrestled with his guilt, unable to sleep. He had spent his life ruling with wisdom, yet he had been blind to the most important lesson of all. True strength lay not in gold or status but in love, compassion, and humility. Finally he could bear it no longer. Summoning his most trusted knights and advisors, he set out on a journey to Zarati. This was not a march of war or power, but of reconciliation. He carried no weapons, no riches, only the hope that his daughter might still find it in her heart to forgive him. The journey was long, and with each passing mile the king's heart grew heavier. When they finally reached the borders of Zarati, he was astonished by the sight before him. The kingdom, once weakened by tyranny, now thrived. The streets bustled with merchants selling their goods, children played without fear, and the people moved about with pride and joy. The air was filled with laughter, music, and a sense of unity that he had never before witnessed. As he entered the palace, he was met with the sight of his daughter and her husband upon the throne. Django, the man he had dismissed as unworthy, carried himself with the grace and strength of a true king. And Zala, his beloved daughter, looked radiant not because of the jewels she wore but because of the light in her eyes. She had found her true place, and it was clear that she was deeply happy. With trembling hands, King Beggar stepped forward and knelt before them, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter," he began, his voice softer than it had ever been. "I was a fool. I let my pride dictate my actions, and in doing so, I lost the most precious gift I had, you. I thought wealth and power defined a kingdom, but you have proven me wrong. You have built something greater than gold, greater than status. You have built a kingdom upon love and justice. And for that I am ashamed." Tears welled in Zala's eyes. She had longed for her father's acceptance, not as a princess, but as the woman she had become. "Father," she said gently, stepping down from the throne. She reached out, placing her hands upon his shoulders. "All my life I only wanted your love. I never needed riches or titles, only the belief that my heart was strong enough to choose its own path. And now you are here. That is all I have ever wanted." Django too stepped forward, his expression kind. "We do not hold grudges in this kingdom, your majesty. If today marks a new beginning, then let it be one of unity, not regret." King Beggar looked up, his eyes filled with relief and gratitude. Slowly he rose to his feet, and for the first time in years he embraced his daughter. The palace erupted in cheers, and a new bond was formed that day, not only between a father and his daughter but between two kingdoms. No longer divided by pride, they stood together as allies, ensuring peace and prosperity for all. As a gesture of goodwill, King Beggar declared that the two kingdoms would forever be united, sharing resources, wisdom, and protection. What had once been a kingdom divided by wealth and status now stood together as one, built upon the unbreakable foundation of love, forgiveness, and destiny's plan. That night, as the stars shone brightly over Zarati, Zala stood upon the palace balcony with her father and her husband. She looked at them both, feeling a sense of completeness she had never known before. "You taught me to be strong, father," she said softly. "And you," she turned to Django, "taught me to love without fear. Because of both of you, I have found my true place." King Beggar smiled, placing a hand upon his daughter's shoulder. "And because of you, I have learned the greatest lesson of all. True strength is not found in power, but in the courage to follow one's heart. As the winds carried their laughter across the kingdom, Zala knew that fate had worked its magic once again. Love had triumphed, healing even the deepest wounds, and destiny had woven a tale that would be remembered for generations to come. As the years passed, the tale of Zala and Django became more than just history, it became legend. Elders in both kingdoms would gather children around roaring fires at night, their voices weaving the story of the princess who chose love over riches and the beggar who was truly a lost king. The wind seemed to carry their names through the lands, whispering of a love so pure and a destiny so powerful that even time could not erase it. In marketplaces and royal courts alike, storytellers recounted the extraordinary journey of the princess who defied her father's will, leaving behind the comforts of a palace to embrace a life of hardship alongside the man she loved. They spoke of her unwavering faith, of how she stood beside Django even in the darkest of times, and how her kindness and courage led them to reclaim his lost kingdom. Fathers told their sons that wealth alone does not make a man great, it is his heart, his wisdom, and his love that truly define him. Mothers reminded their daughters that strength is not found in gold or jewels, but in the power to follow one's heart despite the world's judgment. And rulers, inspired by Zala and Django's legacy, sought to govern with justice, remembering that the truest riches lie not in treasures but in the loyalty and happiness of their people. The once divided kingdoms of Beggar and Zerati flourished together. Trade routes opened, cultures merged, and people traveled freely between the lands. The barriers of class and status that once separated them slowly faded, replaced by unity and mutual respect. In the capital city of Zerati, a grand monument was built, a statue of Zala and Django standing side by side, their hands clasped in eternal love. Inscribed beneath it were the words, "Love is the greatest treasure. Destiny guides those who are brave enough to follow their hearts." As the years turned into centuries, generations continued to honor their memory. Every year, on the day of their wedding anniversary, both kingdoms celebrated a festival of love and fate. Lanterns were released into the sky, symbolizing the light of destiny guiding lost souls. Couples renewed their vows, children dressed as princes and princesses, and families shared meals, reminding one another of the story that had shaped their lands. Though Zala and Django had long passed, their love never faded. Some claimed that on quiet nights, when the wind blew softly through the palace gardens, one could hear their laughter carried by the breeze. Others believed that their spirits watched over the kingdom, ensuring that love and justice always prevailed. One day an old storyteller sat beneath a great baobab tree, surrounded by eager young listeners. With a knowing smile, he began to weave the tale once more. "There was once a princess," he said, his voice rich with warmth. "She had everything: gold, jewels, a palace of splendor. But what she desired most was something money could never buy. A love that was true, a love that was pure." The children leaned forward, their eyes wide with wonder. "And there was a beggar," he continued, "who had nothing but his heart, his wisdom, and a past hidden in mystery. The world saw him as a man of rags, but the princess saw something else. She saw a king." The youngest child, barely 5, asked with innocent curiosity, "But if he was a king, why was he a beggar?" The storyteller chuckled. "Ah, my child, because fate works in strange ways. Sometimes, destiny hides greatness in the humblest of places. And sometimes, love is the only key that can unlock the truth." As the sun set over the land, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, the story of Zala and Django lived on. It was no longer just a tale of the past, it had become a timeless lesson for all who dared to listen. Because love, after all, was the greatest force of all. And destiny? Destiny always had a plan.